Good morning. I am Jay Rosenthal. Way over there is Jeremy Burke, and in the middle is Mitchell Osak. He is from Quanta Consulting. That's the name of his firm, but he is also man about the cannabis industry circuit. Mitchell, nice to see you.
Pleasure to be here, guys. Thank you.
It's like we're, this is like Mitchell, you and I are close together geographically. Jeremy, if he was in Toronto, would also
if I was home,
also be geographically close, but
Yeah.
not so much. And as often happens, there's a step down of beards between mine, then Jeremy's, then Mitchell. You're clean shaven. This is like beginning, middle, and late stage Stanley Cup playoff beards.
Right.
That's what I'm calling it. Yeah.
Let's not talk about Mitch Marner on this one.
Well,
yeah, exactly.
He is. Well, I will say though, and this needs a plug, a hockey plug, because it's not getting enough attention here. But as a Marlies season ticket holder, the Marlies are about to play in the Calder Cup Finals starting this week. They beat Wilkes-Barre Scranton last night in Game 6, and so they are going to the Calder Cup Finals. Big doings. And the other Nylander scored the game-winning goal, so that's what
okay.
We will claim Alex Nylander as the last Nylander standing in Toronto hockey scene right now. So, with all that said, Mitchell, welcome.
Thank you.
I wanted to have you on, and as the title suggests, Canada already did this. Here's what happened, and we can talk about that, and that'll frame a bunch of these things. But almost most pressingly is this week, Trulieve is going to list their medical spinoff, let's call it, on the New York Stock Exchange. This sounds familiar. History rhymes. This happened in Canada. It was a big deal when Canadian companies got listed, certainly on the CSE and then on the TSX, and it caused a boom, whatever. It was exciting for a good period of time about the Canadian companies going public. Those are not necessarily the ones you hear about now. So, what does this rhyme to you about what happened in Canada, or are there significant differences? Oh, and now he's gone.
We lost him.
Yeah, he'll come back though. I promise. Was it you or was it us?
I think it was me.
Okay. Did you kick him off?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, fair enough. Well, we'll just riff while we wait for him to come back. He was going to say something brilliant, I'm sure.
What do you want to talk about?
Well, Jeremy, you wrote a piece that was actually, I think it's on Yahoo Finance today.
Yes.
Spot at Moby.
It is.
Is there interest from investors about what's happening? Like, do they know this is happening? Is it like going to draw a huge interest from retail investors because it's the first pot stock they can invest in?
This is theoretical, right? This is not based on my reporting, but I believe so. And I believe two things. Like, one, there is, all the access on Robinhood that there was not before, right? And so there's thousands and thousands of millions almost of daily active users on Robinhood and are seeing these stocks and looking for a way to get involved with the cannabis industry. And they're not so attracted to the Canadians, right? I mean, I think some of them bought probably a couple of years ago, but Trulieve uplisting is huge. At the same time, I do think there is, there's some consternation that Trulieve is only uplisting its medical business, right? I think that will change things as that starts to permeate, depending on the DEA hearings.
Oh,
we don't know. There he is. Yeah.
Don't know what happened, guys. You froze.
No, you froze. No, I'm just kidding. Although we did have while you were gone, we actually have some funny people on that follow us, and this was one of the comments.
Yeah, I had
He's going to grow a beard.
Okay.
He's going to grow a beard.
That's funny. But that's funny by one of the funniest and smartest OGs in cannabis in North America.
Yeah, good.
Hi, Catherine.
Hi, Catherine. Thanks for joining. So, Mitchell, the question was, does Trulieve listing on the New York Stock Exchange rhyme with what happened in Canada? Or are there significant differences that make it sort of wildly different?
Okay, simple question. Let me first say that 6 years ago, I stopped reading the crystal ball in this industry. I can't answer it. I won't answer it because the fact is, who really knows? Is it positive for Trulieve? Absolutely. Is it positive for the industry? Absolutely. But Trulieve will be coming on the New York Stock Exchange, where basically 7 stocks represent 50% of the value. Huge volatility there. There's a lot of alternative asset classes like AI, infrastructure, defense that are vying for the dollar. We have, according to Polymarket, a 50% chance of a Fed rate increase this year in an overvalued stock market, which can bring valuations down. Am I optimistic? Yes. Do I like Trulieve as a company and as an operator? Absolutely. but cannabis and Trulieve don't sit in a financial markets bubble. There are a lot of other factors there. And I'll also say there are a lot of other companies that are coming behind Trulieve, and they're very solid investable companies.
Yeah.
So will it rhyme? Perhaps, but the more important question in this industry from a financial perspective, and you guys know this, is not whether something will happen. Anybody can prognosticate about that, but when it'll happen and how it'll happen. And those are two different things that no one has a clue about.
Well, on Friday's show, which we call This Week in Cannabis Live, we talked about the possibility of Trulieve listing. For sure, that's going to happen, I guess, this week. Then it's what happens if Florida legalizes adult use cannabis and their whole operation is predicated on that fact. What happens then? But I think, to your point, that must be inside the conference rooms at Trulieve too. Like, we know what we know today.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know what we don't know tomorrow. With the timeline, let's do what we can do today.
So perhaps Trulieve will spend another $100 million plus fighting adult use cannabis in Florida. I mean, as crazy as that sounds, if I've got a 6-month head start on the New York Stock Exchange, that's not beyond the realm of possibility, right? We do and have seen regulatory capture in this industry, and that's a strategy that cuts across every industry in most large companies. So I wouldn't be surprised if somebody's even thinking about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one point to mention on that, I think, while many other MSOs are playing catch up to Trulieve right now and trying to figure out the same path, this is very beneficial to Trulieve's business because they do have such a strong medical business, right? They have, some estimates 40% of Florida's medical market, right? And so this pathway works for them. It may not work for everyone else. I think that's important to point out.
Yes, if I was them, I'd be absolutely doing this. But
totally.
Jeremy, to your point, each company has a different competitive situation, different split between adult use and rec.
Right.
The fact of the matter is, one size doesn't fit all. Even when it comes to being public, I mean, we can unpack the whole debate whether most cannabis companies should even be public, and their values are they best represented in the public markets versus the private markets? That's an important question that no one has unpacked that I've seen so far.
Well, you know who has unpacked it? The private companies.
Yeah.
They unpack it every day.
Ones.
And even in as much as we had on what's her name? Rand.
Gail
Rand.
Yeah. Like, she was actually at the breakfast where and she does a gross margins percentage sort of tracker, which is interesting. And they do, I think they track like 20 companies, but usually only show the 15 that are the best of that quarter, because some people make major investments in operations and take a write down out of necessity. But that's the other thing. Like, companies that are private can make major investments that the investors don't need to see or know about. It's a major advantage.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what I try and do is, I'm totally committed to cannabis. I've been in the legal market for 9 years, but I'm old enough to come from financial services and pharmaceuticals and CPG before that. So I'm lucky that where I sit on the perch, I was able to see trends in capital markets that are outside of how a lot of cannabis people think. If you look at the actual data, the percentage of companies, and Jeremy, you just finished your MBA, so you might actually know the more recent data. The percentage of companies that are public and stay public has been going down for almost decades.
Yeah.
So in this mania for cannabis companies to go public and to uplist, it's really bucking a trend of every other sector outside of cannabis that's going back to being private for a variety of reasons, valuation being one of them.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. But the private market, like my career is younger, right? But I did just do my MBA, and we did look at this, and it's absolutely true, Mitchell. The private markets are so much more liquid than they ever were before. Venture investors have so much more money, and companies stay private and don't go public for a very, very long time. I mean, look at AI, which has some sort of corollary to cannabis. Anthropic and OpenAI are still private companies and nearing $1 trillion valuations, which is crazy, right? But, cannabis companies, they do, because, institutions are still hands off, they want the retail investors, right? And the way to sort of get access to that is to go public and maybe earlier in the life cycle of a similar size and similarly capitalized company. So I think we are seeing some of that too, to your point.
Yeah, absolutely. It's crazy that you've got $1 trillion IPOs and things like SpaceX, You know, that
Right.
IPO is bigger than I think 100 economies around the world. What I think there's a very, back to Jay's original question, which is very poignant. The question is, when these companies go public, cannabis companies, and you get that inevitable share boost, what comes afterwards? Because
Right.
what we've seen in the history of cannabis through facts is that algos and short sellers attack these stocks and drive them all the way back down. So I'm very fearful for the retail investor, because when you couple in positive news, greed, improving operating results, it becomes a perfect storm for share price bumps, big bumps, but also the short sellers and some of the more nefarious characters to start going after these stocks on major exchanges and to drive those prices down. That could be a real dampening on cannabis public markets. And that could happen to Trulieve. I don't think it will happen with Trulieve because it's one of the best examples, because they're so strong in medical. But for some of the others coming afterwards, I'd be concerned about that.
Speaking with an historical lens, it seems to me that there are a lot of lessons from the Canadian market, which is big. It was national for sure, but I think the growing pains that got to a steady state, which I think is quasi where we are now. You know, there was a supply constraint. There was a ramp up of retail. There was price compression dramatically. The big difference, or a big difference, is that when the province sits in the middle of the transactions, one, the price goes up. We could talk about that. But two, many more people get paid because they have to get paid. Whereas we haven't, I mean, there are people that don't pay their bills in the Canadian landscape too, but it's not the people, it's not the brands selling to retailers, because that transaction is taken care of and retailers have to pay for it in real time, basically. Like, what are the lessons? Like, you've seen it all, and then you've seen it repeat itself in every new market, is my guess, or some variation of it. Like, what are the lessons that people aren't taking away in new markets that Canada learned the hard way?
Again, that's a simple, open-ended, and huge question, and I don't want to bore you and your audience for another hour.
It's impossible to bore this audience. It is made up of cannabis nerds.
Yeah, they love it.
Okay, so a couple of lessons, and then I'm going to talk about blind spots,
Okay.
because that's also relevant. So, one major lesson, and it's important to understand it, but anyway, the real difficulty of building brands. Building brands in Canada is very difficult because of the owner's branding regulations and restrictions. And in my humble opinion, while you do have brands that people know in Canada, you don't have a Tide or a Kleenex or a Nike. It just
Right.
doesn't exist. And I'm old enough, you guys probably aren't, to remember something called a Pepsi Challenge. If you Pepsi challenged a variety of brands, both in Canada and the United States, you have consumers who would be hard pressed to tell the difference. So to me, one of the major lessons coming out of Canada is the challenge of building brands. And what we do know is two of the major pillars of building those brands are product quality and consistency. So I'm not saying high quality, low quality, but quality for the segment that you're targeting and consistently delivering that product, because that's what a brand is. And Canadian LPs have learned that the hard way. And you're starting to see brand segmentation and segregation. And that's a very good lesson. But that takes a lot of time. And when we talk about wasted marketing capital, we've seen that in Canada, and we're starting to see that in the United States. So there's a lot of learning around developing brands and what that means. Number two, associated with that, is the idea of focus. In Canada, lots of LPs will throw anything against the wall to capitalize on any trends, whether it's vape, infused pre-roll, what have you. And guess what? You get SKU proliferation, you get complexity, and so on. That's a failed strategy. The strongest companies, Apple being one, have a focused set of products targeted specific markets. Our US brothers and sisters haven't learned that lesson yet. They're all over the place, potentially for a lot of structural and regulatory reasons, but nonetheless, more is not more, less is more. That's number two. Let's talk about some blind spots, if that's okay, because
Please.
Yeah.
I love the United States. I spent a lot of time there, have family there. So I talk to Americans on a regular basis, in person, on the phone, and in these calls. It's unbelievable to me how they don't look at cost curves in Canada, how they don't look at price compression in Canada for a market, a federally legal market that you said, Jay, that's older than a lot of US markets, save California and Colorado. When I started consulting in this industry in 2017, I visited Colorado and I visited California. I wanted to learn of how the market develops and does this, right? I can't tell you how few Americans I speak to call me and say, okay, how is the market declining? When does it peak? We can model this out now with math. And thanks to Claude and ChatGPT, it's super simple. If you can find the cost curves and model them out, and it's possible to do that, you can run your business very differently in the United States based on the Canadian experience. The markets aren't exactly the same. Of course, the consumers aren't exactly the same, but modeling cost curves that need to come down through a range is not very difficult right now. And Canadians are growing, arguably right around 50 cents a gram. And that will
Right.
surprise a lot of Americans because they've moved down the cost curve, the experience curve, because they get low cost energy in places like Quebec and so on and so forth. There's a lot of operational lessons that Americans can learn from Canadians. The other major blind spot, and Jay, again, you touched upon this, is export. Canada roughly has 65 to 70% of the global market share for flower, and flower predominates globally. Thanks to rescheduling, all these American companies are going to say, we're going to export. They have no idea. First of all, we don't know if that's going to be allowed with the DEA, but presuming it is, they have no idea about EU GMP. They have no idea about GACP. They have no idea that they're showing up to a German market, which is a good, healthy $1.2 billion market, not second or third to the party, 50th to the party.
Right.
A medical market where it's prescribed to patients. It's very difficult to break in there with a Me Too product, even a cheaper product. So there's just so much Americans can learn from the Canadian export experience. And it took Canadians a couple of years to figure it out, let's be honest. So it's all these different areas that I think Americans can learn from Canadians, and Canadians can learn from Americans, obviously.
Sorry, Jared, I want to ask a
Yeah, go
question
ahead. Yeah.
because, we're talking about a heavily regulated industry for sure. And we're talking about markets that are different in some specific ways. And a lot of it, especially in the States, comes down to local regulators, right? State regulators. And we talk about this a lot. And we've talked about it in Canada in some respects where, there were priorities for the federal government and Health Canada around regulating cannabis. Keep it out of the hands of kids, make sure it's product tested, right? Collect taxes, basically. I mean, there were some others, but that was really it. And none of those three priorities, or even maybe the next 7, were about making sure the industry flourishes. Right? We've had on regulators, and we ask them this question in New York and California. They want to clamp down the black market. Like they have their priorities, and it's not the end, but it's also not the most important thing, that they want the industry to thrive. And Mitchell, you've been in rooms, I'm sure, where you go to Health Canada or members of Parliament and say the industry needs these 3 things. And the people on the other end of the table say that you sound exactly like every other industry that wants stuff from government, right? Like in some respects, you want that. You want to be like every industry. In some respects, there are some burdens that don't exist in other industries. Like that cycle is still not worked through in Colorado and in California, where the industry and the survival of it or the thriving of it is paramount, or even acknowledged, really. And that cycle can take a long time, or maybe forever. Like I don't know how long it took for the alcohol industry to get noticed as an industry where there are jobs attached to it and tax dollars and be recognized for that.
So are you chumming the waters for me to launch a tirade against various Canadian governments? Because
I want you to acknowledge that those things, we've seen it in Canada and they don't change fast.
Absolutely. I'm much more optimistic about the United States in this regard because it's much. I'm not an American, but my sense is, and from what I've seen in New York, and Jeremy can speak better about that in California, is that it's at least more business friendly or pro business. We don't see any of that in Canada. You have zero interest among various levels of government in Canada, from municipal, to your point, Jeremy, right up to the feds in Canada, to really do any meaningful reform to help our industry. They just don't care. I firmly believe that. And they don't care for, I think, 3 reasons. One is there's not enough corporate lobbying dollars to push them or influence them. not only are there not enough dollars, but we're not organized properly to speak as one voice and so on. And it's hard to speak of one voice because we're basically islands of different markets right across the Canada. That's number one. Number two, the votes aren't concentrated in one place. There's no cannabis constituency. We've got Leamington, we've got, southern BC, we've got a few different places, but those regions exert no voting power. So there's no impetus for a politician to respond to our industry because we're scattered all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Number three, not only do we not align behind one organization, and maybe we can't actually because we're so diverse, but that organization in Canada is underfunded, underrepresented, speaks too Canadian, too polite, doesn't come with what I think are powerful enough arguments. It's basically insipid. It's Canadian. So we get in Canada, I hate to sound like such a downer, but we get in Canada what we deserve. Whereas in the United States, I think there's much more mobilization for better policies, better regulations. And I'm not saying it's cheap, but where have you seen a tax reduction in Canada? You haven't. You've seen it in California, you've seen it in other places. It's just a tale of two cities when it comes to regulatory reform. And I don't see Canada changing in the near future.
The only caveat to that I would say that I've seen is Organogram in Moncton, New Brunswick, which does have a lot of overrides from the government. But you're talking about a very, very small province and a very, very small city, and they are the biggest private employer. Like if you were outsized in a local community, it's much easier, which is pretty rare.
Yeah. Right.
There is, I think, Mitchell, what you're getting at a little bit is, anyone who lives in Canada, grew up in Canada, understands tall poppy syndrome pretty well. And I think there is an element of that with cannabis, especially in Canada, both because, it was written into the rules that this was, Trudeau, when he passed the law, said this was a public health thing, right? This wasn't necessarily for economic development. That seemed to be, a side effect, an after effect with how policymakers were thinking about it. And two, like you said, it's Canada. It's really hard to stick out. It's not the culture. It's definitely not the business culture in Canada, in my experience, at least.
Yeah, and optics also matters. So we've had various commissions on cannabis and reform, and if you guys follow it, you'll know that if there's one business representative on that to represent the interest of our industry. When I say industry,
right,
I'm also talking about thousands of workers. Everyone thinks it's all about shareholders and oligarchs.
No.
And like there are real people employed in these companies in rural areas in New Brunswick and so on, and they need a voice. And they're not unionized, so we can't go down that path. It boggles my mind that Canada would even have the feds would have these discussions about the industry and not include anybody in the industry in it, or even people like me who can speak on behalf of more than one or two firms. I'm not trying to sound like such a downer, but I mean, I don't believe all the statistics around our economic impact, but it is in the tens of billions of dollars. It matters, and it matters in a world where we have trade frictions with the United States. We have other economic issues with deficits and so on. Like this is a bit of a no-brainer, and we still have a window in Canada to continue to dominate internationally because we have the best product at the lowest price in markets that don't have a strong domestic industry yet, and we're not doing it, and it's frustrating as heck to me.
Well, me too. Me too. Well, it is interesting. I mean, I would say, people in New York, when they go to Albany, they hear the similar message. Like once in a while, something bubbles up. But I think a lot of legislators who are on a tight timeline, lots of competing interests, say we did this thing, let's move on to the next thing.
Correct.
The next thing is probably not cannabis or cannabis reform. I will say though that we live relatively downtown Toronto. Like you do recognize it when there's a proliferation of retail and then the retail scales back. Now you have empty storefronts with cannabis on the front. Like it doesn't look great. Like in our neighborhood, we had 6 stores. Now we have 4, and soon we'll have 3 and 2 that are now black market ones. Like, it does when the neighborhood says, hey, why do these illegal stores reopen up when the legal ones close down? That becomes a sort of on the ground pressure that legislators do listen to because it is neighborhood specific, but it's not a grand plan.
Yeah. And you mentioned 5 minutes ago that I've had discussions with senior government officials. I have.
Yeah.
And one thing they've said, which is very poignant and on point, is, very often they say the fact that there were so many licensees who came in and they competing for a fixed, like that's capitalism, baby. And they said it, and they're 100% correct. We need, I hate to say this because it's going to mean a lot of, jobs lost and so on and so forth, but we need a flushing out of the industry in Canada. We need fewer companies and stronger companies. And not only will that maybe help nudge reform, but that'll create a healthier industry. That's not the government's problem.
Right.
That's our problem. And we need to address that. And slowly but surely, market forces are addressing that.
Yeah, Mitchell, we're coming up on time, but one thing I want to sort of ask, and I want you to crystal ball, which I know you don't want to do. Imagine we're having this conversation a year from now where I think a lot of things will actually have changed. I mean, there will be at least one cannabis company listed on the New York Stock Exchange. That's going to happen this week. A year from now, they'll have been on there a year, roughly. We have a market in Canada that I think will continue to chug along. We'll have some growth in U.S. markets, but do you think we'll actually have major, do you think rescheduling will happen for adult use cannabis in the US? And then what will be the immediate, to your point, immediately follow-on effects that we're going to see?
Yes, I think Virginia will come online eventually. I think in the next year. I think Pennsylvania will. I think we will get that. But, there's a saying in the software industry, never confuse the install with the sale. These things will happen. How will they happen? Who knows? Will we get adult use? I doubt it. I doubt it because, I mean, I haven't seen the latest figures, but there's 12 Republican senators or congressmen who are going to meet President Trump and, express their displeasure. We've got midterms coming up. I think Trump got his win on this.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not in the White House. He got his win on this. He's going to take it. He's going to see some companies uplist and so on. So do I see that in 2026? No, not really. Do I see it eventually? Absolutely. So yes, there will be a lot of things that are going to happen. In what cadence, I don't know. And what the final forms will be, who knows? I know rescheduling was a curveball for a lot of people. They didn't see how that was going to happen. That's the way this president seems to operate. There are a lot of other influences, as you guys know, on his policy making and so on. We can't discount partisanship. We can't discount all these things. Will we get different, safer carve-outs? That's very possible as well. But it's a crazy environment where we have wars and deficits and scandals. Like, who knows? And that's why I don't like to prognosticate, because some clever person is taping this, and a year from now, they're going to come out and say, what a colossal idiot this guy was, based on current information, and they would be right.
We should have a disclaimer that comes on, not about financial disclosure, but really just about anything, right? Like, what we say today is based on today's information from June 8th at 10 a.m. in the morning, as opposed to June 9th or June 10th, which actually could change dramatically.
But that's
Absolutely.
cannabis.
There's not enough disclaimers in this industry because, again, coming back to, there's tens of millions of dollars at stake. Companies make bets based on these kinds of things, investors, and people get constantly burned. So I just want a more professional, responsible organization, media, and so on. You guys are like that, but we need more of that in this industry. Less gas on the fire, more pumping the brakes a little bit.
Oh, look at you. Big compliment. You also said I had a profound question, which I've already clipped and sent to my mom.
Got it.
She loves it. Mitchell, I appreciate your time today. We look forward to seeing you out and about in downtown Toronto this summer, eating at delicious places. Jeremy, nice to see you this morning. Everybody, we will be back later this week on cultivated.news. Usually I have a hat on. It says cultivated.news. But if you are on your computer, go to cultivated.news, get our newsletter in your inbox every day. Follow us on YouTube, connect with us on the LinkedIn, and we'll show how to connect with Mitch Osak as well. It's easy.
Thank you.
You write profound things on LinkedIn. So
Agreed.
Follow you on LinkedIn.
Agreed.
Thank you. And you can print it out and wrap dead fish in it as well.
You can.
Dual use.
You absolutely can.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. See you later.
Thank you, guys. Be
Thanks,
well.
Mitchell. Bye.
Great job.